At 75 years old, I stood in the marble foyer of my own house and watched my daughter toss my suitcase onto the floor. "Dad, you'll be fine in the guest house," she said, brushing a strand of perfect blonde hair from her face. "Colin and I need more space for the twins, and honestly, you'll have more privacy there." Privacy. That's what she called exile. Now tell me something, have you ever built a home with your bare hands only to be told you no longer belong in it? Because that's exactly what happened to me that morning. My name is Arthur Reynolds, 75 years old, born and raised in Denver, Colorado. For 40 years, I was an architect. Not just any architect, I designed the kind of homes people put on magazine covers, glass walls, infinity pools, Italian marble, the kind of luxury I thought I'd earned by the time I retired. When my wife Eleanor and I built this estate 20 years ago, I told her, "This will be our legacy." We laid every tile, chose every window, planted every oak. And now, my daughter Lydia, the same little girl who used to build sandcastles on my blueprints, was pointing me toward the guest house like I was hired help. "Dad, you'll be fine there for now," she said again, waving toward the manicured path that led across the courtyard. For now. That phrase stung more than I expected. I looked past her shoulder into the house I had built, mahogany beams, the grand piano Eleanor played on Sunday afternoons, the fireplace I designed for family Christmases. Now it was filled with Lydia's designer furniture and her husband Colin's endless photography equipment. They had turned our home into a content studio for Lydia's luxury lifestyle channel. I had seen them filming in my kitchen before, but this time, she wasn't acting. "Your mother would have wanted us to live as a family," I told her quietly. She didn't even hesitate. "No, Dad. She would have wanted you to be comfortable. You're just better off in your own space." Colin appeared behind her, wearing a linen shirt that probably cost more than the chair he was leaning on. He gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind that hides entitlement behind politeness. "It's only temporary, Arthur," he said. "We're planning a few renovations, nothing major. We'll move you back once everything's settled." Renovations. I knew what that meant. Every time someone used that word, it meant demolition was coming. I took one last look at the living room where Eleanor's portrait still hung above the fireplace, and then I picked up my suitcase. The marble floor echoed beneath my feet as I crossed it, each step heavier than the last. The guest house sat at the edge of the property, a small stone cottage with ivy crawling up the side. We used to call it the garden retreat. Now it felt like a quarantine zone for unwanted family. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten summers. The curtains were still the ones Eleanor had chosen, floral, cheerful, a touch of yellow, she said brought light to any room. I set my suitcase on the bed and stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of laughter coming from the main house. Their laughter. My silence. That's when it hit me this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a reassignment. I wasn't the head of this family anymore. I was an old man they'd quietly moved off the chessboard. I sat by the window as evening fell, watching the lights flicker on in the mansion across the garden. Every light that turned on was a reminder of the space I'd built and lost. And yet, under the ache, something steadier was forming like steel under pressure. A question I couldn't shake. How far does love go before it turns into manipulation? The answer I decided would come soon enough. Before we go further, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always read where my listeners are tuning in from. It reminds me how stories like this connect us no matter where we are. That first night in the guest house, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like punishment. The kind of silence that seeps into your bones and whispers questions you're not ready to answer. I sat at the small oak table Eleanor once used for morning tea, staring at the single lamp flickering against the wall. Outside, the fountain gurgled faintly, the one I'd designed as a wedding gift for her 40 years ago. The sound used to bring calm. Now it just reminded me how easily things fall apart when you stop tending them. Dinner was a sandwich I didn't finish. The TV stayed off, and the phone, which had rung all day with Lydia's instructions about utilities and delivery schedules, finally went quiet. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt erased. In the distance, I saw lights still blazing in the mansion, bright, careless, alive. Lydia and Colin were hosting one of their business dinners, probably serving champagne on the balcony I built with my own hands. I could almost hear the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation, that familiar tone of wealth pretending to be culture. I told myself I'd raised her better than this. But maybe I hadn't raised her to understand enough. At 75, you start realizing that the lessons you thought you taught your children weren't the ones they learned. The clock ticked toward midnight. Somewhere between exhaustion and anger, I walked to the window and opened it, letting the cold air wash over my face. The stars above Denver were sharp and clear like cut diamonds. That's when the memory hit me. Eleanor's voice, calm and firm the night before her surgery years ago. Arthur, she'd said, don't ever let comfort make you blind. You can build a palace, but if you forget who you are, you'll end up lost in your own hallways. And here I was, lost. In the very place I built to be my sanctuary. I sank into the chair by the window and whispered the words I hadn't said in years. Lord, I don't know if you still listen to stubborn old men, but if you do, help me understand what I'm supposed to do with this kind of betrayal. The prayer didn't bring answers. It brought stillness. A kind of quiet strength that started in the chest and spread outward, steady, solid, real. I remembered something Eleanor once told me when one of my projects went wrong. You can always rebuild Arthur, but you can't rebuild without first clearing the debris. Maybe this humiliation, this exile was my debris. The next morning I woke before sunrise. Habit, I suppose. For 40 years, I'd risen at 5 a.m. to get to job sites. Even in retirement, that rhythm never left me. I brewed coffee in a chipped mug, the same one Eleanor used to insist on keeping because it still works perfectly. As I looked out toward the main house, I saw Lydia's Range Rover already gone. Colin's Tesla sat in the driveway charging quietly like it owned the air it breathed. I walked outside and noticed something odd, boxes stacked near the garage labeled Dad's office. Curiosity turned into a knot in my stomach. I opened one. Inside, my blueprints. Decades of designs. Projects that had taken me years now crammed together like junk at a yard sale. On top of them sat a sticky note in Lydia's handwriting. We'll organize these later, no room inside right now. No room inside. That was the moment something inside me shifted. The ache turned to clarity. This wasn't about space. It was about control. And I'd handed it to her without realizing it, one small favor at a time. One signature, one password, one sure go-ahead. I closed the box carefully and carried it back into the guest house. Then I sat down and opened my old leather notebook, the one I'd used for every major construction project since 1978. On the first page in Eleanor's handwriting were 3 words she'd written decades ago: integrity. Planning, patience. That's when I decided if Lydia and Colin wanted to treat me like a guest in my own house, I'd start acting like the owner they forgot I was. I made a list: check property documents, review account authorizations, contact Charles Monroe, locate power of attorney papers. Simple steps, logical steps. But underneath them, a deeper line was forming an invisible boundary that said, no more. I looked at the house once more, sunlight hitting its glass walls like fire. I whispered softly, faith without action is just surrender. And I wasn't surrendering. By the end of that week, I realized the guest house wasn't just temporary, it was strategy. Lydia and Colin weren't giving me space. They were rearranging ownership. It started small: a few missing mail envelopes, statements that never arrived, passwords that stopped working. Then one morning, I got an email from the bank: notification address change confirmed. Only I hadn't changed a thing. I walked up the stone path to the main house, sunlight cutting through the pines. Lydia was filming in the kitchen, camera lights on, her hair perfect, voice polished for her followers. And that's how you style modern luxury when you're living in a multi-million-dollar estate outside Denver. I froze in the doorway. Multi-million-dollar estate. Funny how easily she said you're living when every stone in that house came from my money. When she saw me, she muted the mic, smiled that tight influencer smile, and said, "Dad, can it wait? We're live in 10 minutes. No, it can't," I said evenly. Why is my bank mail coming here but disappearing? Her eyes flicked toward Colin, who stood near the espresso machine in another designer shirt. He gave a nervous laugh. "Must be a forwarding issue, Arthur. These systems mess up all the time." "Then why does the address on file show your email?" Their smiles faltered. "You see, I may be 75, but I didn't spend 40 years managing architectural contracts without learning to spot forgery. I asked to see the paperwork for the so-called property refinance they'd been bragging about to guests last week." Lydia hesitated too long. Finally, she pulled a folder from the counter, glossy and neat. "It's all legal, Dad. We refinanced to lower your mortgage rate. You said the payments were too high." I opened the folder. My signature, or rather, something pretending to be it, stared back at me. Slanted, slightly wrong, looped, too narrow, digital rather than ink. I had designed hundreds of contracts in my life. That wasn't my pen. I looked up at my daughter, this grown woman wearing diamonds I probably paid for. "You forged my name." She crossed her arms. "Don't dramatize this. It's just paperwork." Colin handled it with the broker. Colin raised both hands, defensive. "Arthur, it's just, well, you gave us access months ago. Remember power of attorney? We thought," I cut him off. "You thought wrong." They stared at me, their expressions flickering between fear and indignation, the classic faces of people caught mid-lie, but still hoping charm might save them. I left without another word, the folder tucked under my arm like evidence. Back in the guest house, I laid it flat across the table and began cataloging dates, amounts, reference numbers. Then I opened my laptop and logged into an old construction account, one they didn't know existed. Within minutes, I saw everything: withdrawals, transfers, digital authorizations. $420,000. Vanished. Labeled estate renovations and social media development. My estate, my money funding their lifestyle empire. The cold inside me turned into something sharper, not rage but clarity. Architects are trained to find cracks in foundations before the structure collapses. This was no different. I printed every statement, every fake signature, every invoice that had my name misspelled. Then I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 years. Charles Monroe came, the voice calm professional. "Charles, it's Arthur Reynolds. I need to know exactly how much power my daughter's authorization still gives her." There was a pause, then a low sigh. "Arthur, if she's been using the old durable power of attorney, she's legally in control of your accounts, at least until you revoke it in writing." "Then that's what I'll do," I said. "Today." Charles didn't argue. He'd known me long enough to hear the steel under my tone. "I'll prepare the paperwork. And Arthur, whatever's happening, document everything. Paper is proof. Emotion isn't." That night I followed his advice. My dining table became a crime lab. Receipts, stacked in order, printed emails, bank statements, photo evidence of renovations I never approved. I even photographed the damaged signature, the digital forgery pretending to be mine. Every sound from the main house drifted through the garden: laughter, clinking glasses, music. They were celebrating something, maybe a new sponsorship deal or another round of investments from people who thought my name still stood behind them. I almost pitied them. Almost. Because they hadn't realized something crucial. I may have been pushed into the guest house, but I still owned the blueprints of this property, of my accounts, and of the family empire they thought they'd inherited. And by the time I was done, I'd make sure every one of their fraudulent foundations collapsed legally, cleanly, and permanently. The first thing I did after hanging up with Charles was the kind of thing an old architect does when he finds a flaw in the drawings. He isolates the problem and shores up the structure. No grand speeches, no dramatic reveals, just steps, precise and methodical. Step 1, revoke access. Charles drafted the revocation paperwork that afternoon. Durable power of attorney revoked. Any digital authorizations terminated. He printed the forms on legal paper. His assistant notarized them before the sun set. I signed with the deliberate, careful hand I used on contracts for multi-million-dollar builds. Then we sent certified notices to every institution where Lydia had access. Step 2, freeze and check. I walked into the local branch of the bank I'd worked with for 32 years. Jennifer Walsh still remembered my voice. She greeted me like an old foreman returns to the yard. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, concern wrapping her words. I handed her the notarized revocation and a stack of printed transactions. Freeze secondary access. Audit every withdrawal in the last 18 months. Flag anything labeled media development or estate renovations as suspicious. She asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, her screen filled with lines of red and black transfers. ACH's online bill pays some small, some staggeringly large. Each one had a memo attached for upkeep investment in Collins Project Early Access. Euphemisms for living off my name. Step 3, secure the keys. I changed passwords. I called the property management company I used for maintenance and told them to report to me only. I had locksmiths change the smart locks on doors and the code on the gate. It felt almost ceremonial, taking the locks in hand, turning the tumblers, restoring layers of protection I'd neglected to consider. They were tired of hearing we're family above legal reality. I wasn't going to let sentiment be their loophole. Step 4, document everything. I'd filled a file before daybreak, scanned bank statements, emails from brokers. Lydia never showed me screenshots of her posts bragging about funding renovations, invoices with my name misspelled, and that forgery of my signature. Each printout got a date stamp and a note. You learn to make evidence neat when you've spent a life making construction documents impossible to misinterpret. Step 5: notify and prepare. Charles advised quietness. Don't confront them in public, yet he said, let the law move. Give them the chance to explain to you on paper. So I didn't storm into the mansion. I let the institutions perform their audits. I let the bank place holds. I let the property software show me the access logs the nights Lydia had used my office to stream the hours Colin logged into accounts from IP addresses that didn't match our home. The machine of truth runs cold and slow sometimes, but it runs clean when fed paper. In the meantime, life went on in small, deliberate ways. I fixed a leaky faucet in the guest house. I cleared the garden path so the ivy wouldn't choke the roses Eleanor loved. I slept in a bed that felt both foreign and familiar. The work steadied me. Work always does. Then 2 days after I froze the accounts, an email from the bank arrived: unauthorized transfers under investigation. Secondary access revoked. Short and clinical. A bolt of relief ran through me that felt almost indecent after the hollow tastes of the previous weeks. The real turning point came when the audit turned up a $120,000 transfer to an LLC registered in Colin's name. That was no renovation. That was capital for a lifestyle. The accounts had been siphoned gradually, then aggressively, in a way that suggested planning, not panic. People who think they can live off someone else's legacy are rarely improvisers. They are strategists. I had to be smarter. At dusk that evening, I sat at my small guest house table and pushed a fresh cup of coffee across the papers. I felt the old steadiness come back, engineer's calm, architect's cadence. The plan wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge. It was restitution. It was a restoration to the proper order of things. Me, my home, my name. If you're still with me, if you want to see how a man in his 70s takes back what was taken from him, type 1 in the comments to let me know you're here. Your 1 is the kind of quiet solidarity that matters in stories like this. The morning I decided to confront them, the air over the foothills of Denver felt different, thin and sharp, the way it does before a storm. I'd spent the previous night reviewing every legal clause Charles had highlighted: unlawful occupation, forgery of authorization, civil liability due to misappropriation of funds. Those weren't just words anymore. They were blueprints for justice. At precisely 8:30, I walked up the stone path to the main house this time. Not as a father seeking reconciliation, but as the man whose name was carved into the deed. Lydia was at the kitchen island, swirling oat milk into her coffee, scrolling through her tablet. Colin sat nearby, muttering about a delayed sponsorship payment. They looked like two executives in a penthouse, not squatters in my home. "Morning, Dad," Lydia said without looking up. "Could you ask the gardener to come on Thursdays instead? The blower noise ruins my recordings." I placed a thick manila folder on the marble counter. "We need to talk." She glanced at the folder like it might stain her designer countertop. "Dad, not now. I have a brand deal to film." "It's about those brand deals," I said evenly. "And about the accounts that funded them." Colin straightened, suddenly alert. "What are you talking about? $420,000. Multiple transfers, false authorizations." I opened the folder. Each page had a date, amount, and screenshot. I spent half my life documenting projects for people richer than God. I know paper trails when I see them. And this, I tapped the signatures, isn't mine. Lydia tried to laugh it off, but it came out strained. Oh, Dad, don't be dramatic. We were managing things for you. You told me to handle the paperwork after your surgery. I told you to help me pay bills I corrected, not to refinance the property, forge my name, and drain my accounts. Colin crossed his arms. You're twisting this. We didn't take anything you wouldn't have given us. I looked him square in the eye. You're right, Colin. I would have given you help, not ownership. Silence fell across the kitchen, the kind that only comes when the mask finally cracks. Lydia's eyes darted toward the cameras on the counter. Can we not do this here? She whispered. This is where it happens, I said. Right here in the house you pretended was yours. Then I took a white envelope from the folder and laid it beside her coffee. Effective immediately, I said your access to all accounts has been revoked. All passwords changed. The bank audit is ongoing. Every withdrawal and transfer will be traced back to you. My attorney has filed for full restitution. Colin's face turned red. You had no right. I had every right. I said, my voice calm, steady. You've been living off my name. You turned my home into a set, my reputation into your currency. That ends today. Lydia reached out, placing her hand over mine like she used to when she was 10, and wanted to soften me up for a new bicycle. Dad, please. We can fix this. Don't make it ugly. I looked down at her manicured hand, the same hand that had signed my name on a bank form. It's already ugly, Lydia. I'm just putting it back in order. Her eyes filled with something between fury and fear. You'd really humiliate your own family like this in public. Not in public, I said quietly. In court. For a long moment, none of us moved. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then I collected the folder, slid it back into my briefcase, and adjusted the cuff of my shirt. Charles Monroe will handle all communication from this point forward. You'll receive a notice within 72 hours. Dad, no Lydia, Mr. Reynolds. That's the name on the deed. As I walked back toward the guest house, I felt the strange calm that comes after you've stopped hoping a storm will miss you and start preparing to stand in it. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not a father begging for respect, not a man exiled from his own home, but the architect of my own boundaries. That night, I opened my leather notebook and drew a single line across the page, firm, bold, permanent. It wasn't a blueprint this time. It was a border. That evening, the mountains behind the estate glowed with that burnt orange light Denver gets just before sunset. The kind of light that makes even the most broken things look whole for a minute. I sat by the window of the guest house with my old drafting pen in hand, turning it slowly between my fingers. It used to draw dreams, now it was about to sign something that would end one. Charles called right on time. Arthur, I've drafted the official filings. Once you sign, the county court will begin proceedings for financial restitution and property reclamation. His voice was calm, professional, the way it always had been when I was the client instead of the case. I looked at the stack of papers he'd emailed, formal, deliberate words like unlawful transfer, misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary trust. Words that in my world were as final as concrete. Do it, I said. He hesitated for a moment, then added, Arthur, you know this will burn every bridge left with your daughter. I'm not burning bridges, Charles, I replied. I'm marking where they used to stand before she blew them up. We said our goodbyes, and when the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than usual, dense like air before thunder. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closing for a moment. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of trees, the distant sound of Lydia's laughter spilling out from the main house windows. For months I'd tried to convince myself that forgiveness meant letting things go, that maybe with time she'd come around. But I realized now forgiveness without accountability isn't mercy, it's permission. I opened my Bible for the first time in years. The pages still smelled faintly of cedar from the old church pew Eleanor and I had carved together when the local parish was rebuilding. I flipped to a verse Eleanor loved to quote when I got frustrated at the world. "The truth shall make you free." I ran my thumb over the words and whispered, "You were right, Ellie. It's time to be free." That was my second act of faith, not the prayer for peace I'd said the first week, but faith in justice. Faith that truth handled with steady hands could do what rage never could: restore balance. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and walked outside. The night air bit at my skin, crisp and clean. From the edge of the courtyard, I could see the lights glowing inside the main house, the same warm gold Eleanor had loved. It should have comforted me. Instead, it looked like a warning beacon. I knew what was coming. Lydia and Colin wouldn't go down quietly. They'd plead, negotiate, maybe threaten. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building. The next morning, Charles arrived at my request. He was younger than me by 20 years, but carried the same kind of gravity that only comes from knowing the law down to its bones. We spread the documents across the table like blueprints. Each line, each clause, another beam in the framework of my recovery. This, he said, pointing at the final section, revokes their occupancy rights entirely. They'll have 30 days once the notice is served. 30 days, I repeated. More than fair. He nodded. Would you like to deliver it yourself? I thought about that for a moment. About standing there watching my daughter's face when she realized the father she'd dismissed as old and sentimental was still the man who'd built empires from scratch. Yes, I said quietly. I built this home. I'll reclaim it myself. Charles smiled faintly. You always did prefer to handle the foundation personally. As he packed up, he paused at the door. Arthur, if you'll allow me, this isn't revenge. It's restoration. Don't lose sight of that. I won't, I said. Revenge builds walls. Restoration builds boundaries. After he left, I walked through the guest house, gathering the documents, stacking them neatly in my briefcase. Then I stood before the mirror, an old man, yes, but not a defeated one. The reflection staring back wasn't the man Lydia had pushed into the margins. It was the one Eleanor fell in love with decades ago, the man who stood in the dirt with a blueprint and said, I can build something lasting. And I would. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk across that courtyard with the same steady hands that had built every wall in that house. Only this time, I wasn't laying stone. I was laying law. The night Lydia decided to host her partnership gala, the house glowed like a jewel box. Valets lined the driveway, luxury cars curved around the fountain, and hired servers in black ties carried trays of champagne through the glass doors I had designed 20 years ago. I watched from the guest house terrace, coffee in hand, the hum of polite laughter echoing across the courtyard. My daughter was hosting the kind of event that looks perfect on social media and rotten up close. Inside, I could see her standing near the grand staircase, radiant in a silver gown, camera crew orbiting her like satellites. She was live streaming, of course. Welcome everyone. Tonight we're celebrating the Reynolds Estate Partnership, our dream project made possible by family vision and modern entrepreneurship. Family vision. She said it like a slogan. I almost laughed. By the time the sun set, the place was buzzing champagne bubbles, designer perfumes, the hollow music of people who mistake wealth for worth. That was when I picked up my briefcase. I had waited 30 days for this. 30 days of silence, documents, filings, verified signatures, court stamps. Charles had filed everything that morning: eviction notice, financial restitution order, and property claim. But I'd saved one task for myself: the delivery. At exactly 8 o'clock, I walked across the courtyard. No coat, no hesitation. Just the crisp Colorado air and the rhythm of truth under my shoes. The valet at the door blinked when he saw me. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds. Should I announce you?" "No," I said quietly. "They'll know who I am." The moment I stepped inside, the crowd turned. Some recognized me from the old architecture magazine articles Lydia used to show off. Others just saw a silver-haired man with purpose in his stride. Lydia's smile faltered when she saw the folder in my hand. "Dad," she said through gritted teeth, lowering her microphone. "You're interrupting a live event. Then this will be your most authentic broadcast yet," I replied. Colin appeared beside her, his tie undone, a half-smile frozen on his face. "Arthur, can we talk outside?" I shook my head. "We'll talk right here." I turned toward the guests, businessmen, investors, brand sponsors, and spoke in the calm, deliberate tone that had once commanded construction crews across entire cities. "My name is Arthur Reynolds. I designed this house from the ground up, and tonight it returns to its rightful owner." The room went still. Even the music seemed to fade. I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is a certified court order revoking the unlawful occupation of this property by unauthorized individuals Lydia and Colin Preston." Lydia's face drained of color. "Dad, stop, please." I ignored her. "For the record," I continued, "these individuals forged my signature, accessed my finances without consent, and misrepresented ownership of this estate to obtain personal profit." Gasps rippled through the room. A few of the investors quietly lowered their drinks. Cameras flashed too late. The truth was already alive in the air. A uniformed deputy waiting discreetly by the doorway per Charles's arrangement stepped forward. "Court order verified, Mr. Reynolds. Papers have been served." The legal envelope landed on the marble bar with a sound sharper than glass breaking. "This is insane," Colin barked. "You can't just waltz in here and reclaim my own property," I interrupted. "I can, and I did." He took a step forward, jaw tight, but the deputy's presence reminded him that this time threats meant consequences. Lydia tried one last time, her voice trembling. "You're humiliating us in front of everyone." I met her eyes. "You humiliated yourself when you turned our home into a lie." The livestream camera on the counter was still rolling. I turned to it, voice steady. "For anyone watching," I said, "truth doesn't destroy families, greed does. And this house, this name, this legacy was never for sale." That line hit harder than I expected. The guests looked away. The deputy nodded. The papers were delivered. As I walked toward the door, the air behind me filled with whispers, some pity, some respect. But I didn't care which. The house was mine again. When I stepped outside, the night air hit cold and clean. Above the estate, the sky opened wide, a field of stars over the mountains. And for the first time in years, I felt taller. Because the truth once set in motion doesn't tremble. It stands. The morning after the gala, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. The music, the laughter, the champagne gone. All that remained was the echo of heels on marble and the faint smell of spilled perfume in the air. The deputy had finished serving the papers before midnight. By law, Lydia and Colin had 30 days to vacate, but the truth is they left before sunrise. Shame moves faster than eviction orders. When I stepped into the foyer, I found a single silver heel lying on the steps. Lydia must have lost it during the commotion. I picked it up, turned it in my hands for a moment, and set it on the table beneath Eleanor's portrait. Another broken thing, I murmured. But this one isn't mine to fix. The living room looked like a battlefield after the war of appearances, half-empty champagne glasses, glitter confetti, and a shattered mirror near the piano. Fitting, I thought. Lies always leave glass behind. By 10 a.m., Charles arrived. He looked at the mess, then at me. "You handled last night with restraint," he said. "That's rare in cases like this." "Restraint," I repeated, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "That's what 40 years of architecture teaches you. You build slow, you demolish slower." He smiled faintly. "Well, today we make it official." He laid the stack of papers on the kitchen island, the same place Lydia had staged her live stream hours before. Property restored, funds frozen, fraud investigation underway. "You'll have full access by next week." I signed each page with the same deliberate motion I'd used drafting blueprints decades ago. Every stroke clean, final, permanent. When I finished, Charles nodded. "You're back on record as sole owner." "Good," I said. "Then let's restore the only thing this house still deserves, peace." He gathered his briefcase and paused at the door. "Arthur, if I may, not many people your age would have had the clarity to do this." I looked around the room, the sunlight crawling across the marble floor, the shadow of Eleanor's piano keys. It wasn't clarity, Charles. It was exhaustion. I just got tired of watching my legacy rot under someone else's ambition. When he left, the silence felt like oxygen. The house was mine again, but so was the emptiness. I walked from room to room, taking inventory not of things, but of ghosts. Eleanor's reading chair. The wall where Lydia's height was marked in pencil. The spot near the fireplace where we'd hosted Christmas dinners before she turned holidays into content. Each memory hurt, but each one was also mine to keep. By late afternoon, a moving truck pulled up. 2 men hired by Lydia loaded the last of their belongings under my quiet supervision. No eye contact. No words. Colin's face was pale, his arrogance stripped down to silence. When they finished, Lydia approached me, clutching her purse. Her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far, Dad." I studied her face, the tremor in her lip, the regret hiding behind practiced poise. "I know," I said softly. "But meaning doesn't rebuild trust. Actions do." She nodded, tears streaking her foundation. "Where should we send the key?" I opened my hand. "You can give it to me now." She placed the gold key in my palm, the same one Eleanor used, to hang on her bracelet when the house was new. Her fingers lingered as if she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She turned and walked out the door. The truck rolled down the driveway, and with it went the last noise of pretense. When the gate shut, the stillness that followed wasn't empty, it was clean. I stood at the window for a long time watching the light shift across the hills. The house breathed again, and I thought about something Eleanor told me the year we finished building this place. Every structure needs two things, Arthur, strong walls and open windows. Without both, you'll either lose everything or keep yourself trapped inside. She'd been right about the windows. I'd kept them closed for too long, hoping love would protect me from betrayal. But love without limits isn't love, it's surrender. That night I walked through the halls, turning off lights one by one. In the kitchen, I washed the last wine glass. In the living room, I straightened Eleanor's piano bench. In the foyer, I locked the door and whispered a quiet prayer, not for Lydia, not yet, but for the strength to forgive someday without letting the gates open again. The storm had passed. The structure still stood. And for the first time in years, the foundation finally felt sound. 3 months after the eviction, spring finally came to the foothills. The air smelled like wet pine and clean beginnings. My estate had turned quiet again, but it wasn't the lonely kind of quiet anymore. It was the kind you earn after building something solid, tearing out the rot, and starting again. I spent the first few weeks repairing what had been neglected. The roof tiles above the west wing that Colin had forgotten to fix. The cracked fountain Eleanor had loved. The library doors that no longer aligned. It wasn't about maintenance. It was ritual. Every repair felt like a prayer. Every swing of the hammer, every replaced tile, another piece of my name returning home. The money Lydia had drained was already being restored through the restitution process. Charles handled most of it. I just signed and filed. But when he called one afternoon to confirm that the court had finalized the settlement, he said something that stuck with me. You know, Arthur, most men in your position would have sold the property, moved on, and called it closure. I smiled. Closure isn't selling. Closure is rebuilding. That night, I sat in my office, the one I'd reclaimed and restored, exactly as it was the day Eleanor left it, and pulled out an old folder labeled Scholarship Proposal Eleanor Reynolds Fellowship. It had been her dream long before Lydia's betrayal ever began. Eleanor wanted to sponsor young architects who couldn't afford the education she'd once sacrificed for me to complete. Let's make our legacy something that outlasts stone, she used to say. So I called Charles the next morning and said, it's time to make the fellowship real. By the end of the month, the foundation papers were filed, and a new sign stood by the gate. The Eleanor Reynolds Fellowship. Building character before buildings. I invited the first 2 recipient students from the University of Colorado to tour the property. They stood in the garden with notebooks in hand, asking about design philosophies, structural integrity, and the way sunlight hit the eastern wall. I saw the same spark in their eyes that I once had 50 years ago. And for the first time since Eleanor's passing, I felt proud again, not just of what I'd built, but of what it would now become. A few days later, as I was pruning the roses along the driveway, a small voice startled me. Grandpa Arthur. I turned. Standing by the gate was a little girl with chestnut hair and the same wide eyes Lydia had when she was 7. Beside her, holding a small suitcase, was Lydia herself. She looked thinner, humbled. The kind of humility that doesn't come from rehearsed apologies, but from living through consequence. May we come in? She asked softly. I hesitated for a moment. Then I nodded. Just you and Emma. Yes, she said. Collins. Not part of the picture anymore. We sat on the bench by the fountain, Eleanor's fountain, where everything once began. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Lydia took a deep breath. Dad, I came today to tell you I found a job. Real work. I'm managing accounts for a design firm downtown. I start Monday. I nodded slowly. Good. And I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges, for teaching me what real ownership means. I just didn't understand before. You understand now? I asked. She looked down at her daughter, who was running her fingers through the water in the fountain. Yes, she whispered. I do. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping music. Just a quiet moment of recognition between two people who had finally stopped speaking from pride. Emma looked up at me and said, Mommy says you build houses. I smiled. I used to. Now I build second chances. She giggled and splashed water on my hand. And in that instant, the tension of months dissolved. After they left, I stayed by the fountain until sunset, listening to the water run over the stones. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like regret. It sounded like grace. That night, I walked through the house with the windows open. The smell of pine and mountain air filled every room. The piano sat in its rightful place again. I ran my fingers over the keys but didn't play. Some silences are too sacred to disturb. I stopped by the study where Eleanor's photograph rested beside the fellowship plaque. You were right, Ellie, I said softly. Legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we live right. When I turned off the lights, the reflection of the house glowed faintly in the garden windows, strong and quiet. This time it wasn't just a structure, it was a testimony. Because in the end, I didn't just rebuild walls or reclaim property. I rebuilt something harder: faith. Faith in truth. Faith in accountability. Faith that the human heart, like any good foundation, can crack, but it can also be poured again stronger. And that's what I'll leave behind. A home that stands for integrity. A name that stands for restoration. And a story that reminds anyone listening that you're never too old to reclaim what was taken from you. Some victories aren't loud. Some victories simply stand. It's strange how peace doesn't make a sound when it finally returns. I used to think silence meant loneliness, but now I know it's the sound of things finally being in their place. The house, my life, my faith. Each morning I wake up before the sun and open every window. The mountain air rushes in sharp and clean, and I whisper a simple prayer Eleanor used to say before starting her day. Thank you, Lord, for the strength to build what's right and the wisdom to let go of what's wrong. That's my third act of faith. Not faith in wealth, not in family names or inheritance, but faith in renewal, believing that what's broken doesn't have to stay that way. Sometimes people write to me from all over the country. Retired men, widowed women, sons who feel lost, daughters who feel ashamed. They say, Arthur, I wish I had your courage. But the truth is, it wasn't courage that saved me. It was clarity. The moment you stop begging to be respected and start living with boundaries, that's when your world shifts. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people trample you again. It means letting go of bitterness while standing firm in truth. The house is alive again now, not because of its marble floors or manicured lawns, but because every corner has purpose. Students come here to learn. I sit with them sometimes, sketching plans on the porch, showing them how sunlight bends around structure. They ask, what's the secret to designing something that lasts? And I tell them, don't build with ego. build with patience, and never design a roof for people who don't respect the foundation. When the evenings come, I sit by the fountain, and Emma, my granddaughter, runs circles around me, her laughter echoing through the courtyard like music that finally found its key. Lydia joins her, sometimes quieter, now gentler. We don't talk about the past much. We don't need to. Some apologies are better seen than spoken. I like to think Eleanor would be proud. Not because I won some legal battle, but because I learned how to rebuild with grace. She always said, "Arthur, life is architecture. If one wall falls, design again." She was right. I did design again this time, not a house, but a life. I've come to believe that God doesn't waste pain. He just waits for you to draw blueprints from it. And if you hand him the pen, he'll help you rebuild stronger than before. So if you've ever been cast aside, if someone you loved made you feel like you didn't belong in your own home, remember this. You still own the foundation of who you are. And no one, not even your own blood, can take that away unless you hand them the keys. Because some victories don't need applause. They just need peace. And peace, my friends, feels a lot like freedom. If Arthur's story touched something in you, if you believe in second chances and standing tall after being broken, then take a moment right now to subscribe to Brian's Stories. Share this video and tell us in the comments what part of his journey spoke to your heart. Your voice matters here. Your story might be next. Thank you for watching. And remember, no matter your age, it's never too late to rebuild.